Release year 2013, and you know what was hot? Zombies. You couldn't go anywhere in media without getting a face full of the undead, the very concept of which awakens some certain tendencies in your psychopathic neighbors. Now, NERF and zombies have been going together for quite some time now unofficially with HVZ, or Humans vs. Zombies, a game that was organized and ran on college campuses. You have some players start off as humans, or you have some players start off as zombies. Zombies try to tag the humans and turn them into zombies, and then the horde grows over time and the humans defend themselves, usually with socks, but also sometimes with foam dart blasters. What a different world we lived in back then. And as a human, it was your job to last as long as possible, staving off the undead horde for as long as possible until the inevitable set in, sometimes over multiple days, depending on the game. There were missions with a variety of objectives, and sometimes it was just you trying to get from one class to another without having to turn your human card over to a zombie. But at one point, Humans vs. Zombies became an official organized play structure, and that's where I got in because my college campus actually played HVZ without blasters. You can imagine my frustration. And before NERF even jumped into the game, longtime company Lennard actually produced two officially branded Humans vs. Zombies blasters. The Zombie Fighter Triple Shot and the Zombie Fighter 8-Shot, both of them being branded reshells of existing blasters. But that was years before the advent of NERF Zombie Strike. Are these two things related? We may never know. But 2013 was kind of a renaissance for NERF. I mean, just a year before, they had released the NERF N-Strike Elite range, which overnight pretty much doubled the range of the NERF Dart and changed the landscape of fake firearm foam flingers forever. With every release, hype was building, and a younger, thinner Walcom was building his collection and starting his modding journey into becoming the monstrosity you see before you today. But then the unthinkable happened. NERF Zombie Strike. I'm really upset this has a crease in it. I would put it up for display, but it's ruined now. Maybe the best line in the entirety of NERF offshoots, at least at the start. You see, the story of Zombie Strike isn't exactly ending on a happy note, because it died, like the undead, but it did come back, like the undead. These are not NERF Zombie Strike, these are NERF Zombie. Get subscribed, because we'll be talking about these shortly after this video. But NERF Zombie Strike may very well be my favorite series in the entirety of NERF, along with its literal sister line, NERF Rebel. So I'm going to talk about every single blaster in NERF Zombie Strike history. How they work, what they did right, what they did wrong, and more importantly, what I would possibly change for like a remake of the blaster, how I would fix maybe some of the problems it had when it was released. Zombie Strike has a legacy of bringing out some of the most important, some of the most hyped blasters in the entirety of NERF. But unfortunately, also some of the worst. It's like a tree. You can cut it open, see the rings, and kind of start telling where everything went wrong. Probably about the time you started cutting it open. Do zombies have rings? Has science gotten that far? But the funniest part about all of this is we have to start at the very beginning with one of the best blasters that NERF ever made. The Zombie Strike Hammershot. Released in 2013, and I'm scared to say there are people watching this video that probably weren't alive when the Hammershot was a thing. Alongside another absolute banger of a blaster, the $15 Hammershot filled a niche that very few things ever attempted and even less succeeded at. A compact, one-handed Springer blaster. Fun fact, the Zombie Strike Hammershot was actually originally going to be an N-Strike Elite blaster called the Hammer, and my goodness, did it look good. But the Hammershot here laid out the groundwork for what Zombie Strike was really going for, and that was like a makeshift, cobbled together, handmade, crafted, bespoke, worn in, and beautiful aesthetic. See this wrapped grip right here? I really hope you like that, because that's the hallmark of NERF Zombie Strike. But let's be real, why is this blaster important? Well, because just like its name, it's hammer primed. You can prime this blaster one-handed. You simply just pull back on the hammer, and you've cocked the blaster. If there's one thing NERF did right, it was seemingly always revolvers, and the Hammershot is very compact and holds 5 whole darts before you'd ever actually have to reload the blaster again in its front-facing cylinder, and once you prime it back, you just pull the trigger and it fires a dart. Pull the hammer back again, and you can just keep going over and over again. That's right, proper NERF sidearm. That you could dual wield if you fancied. The Hammershot from the offset might be the perfect humans versus zombies blaster because, well, you don't really need the range. After all, the zombies are coming towards you. And compared to NERF N-Strike Elite, the Hammershot did kind of underperform, with a velocity very similar to a NERF N-Strike Jolt. And it's not like it had the highest capacity either at 5 shots, but what it was meant to be was a sidearm or something you could dual wield. That's where the Hammershot really shines, because before this, there wasn't a whole lot that fit this role that wasn't an electronic blaster. The Hammershot is silent, compact, and most importantly, effective. Which means as a human player, it fit into basically every single loadout imaginable. You pretty much always had a Hammershot on you, if not 2 of them, if not even more. That's the great thing about something that's fun and effective, is that you could use this thing by itself in its intended role, but it's also good enough that you could goof around with it and have 6, 8 of them on you. Why not? It's your apocalypse. Have fun with it. This thing pretty much cemented itself as the must-have blaster for anyone looking to usurp the undead. Problems? It's got a few. Like, if you have worn darts at all, like you're scavenging because it's a front-facing cylinder, well, they tended to fall out the front because it was open, and that could lead to you drawing your Hammershot and firing a blank because your dart fell out a long time ago as you were running for your life. And design-wise, well, I really like the kind of slapped-together industrial look that a lot of Zombie Strike has, especially with the wrapped grip, and the silhouette of this thing is fan-freaking-tastic. I never really liked this underbite here that makes even Beavis look beautiful.
Are you threatening me?
Also, if you had smaller hands, it could be very difficult for you to prime this thing without completely adjusting your grip every single time. Not a huge deal breaker, but it can be frustrating, especially in the heat of the moment.
Are we not saying phrasing anymore?
But the good news is, even at the time, this wasn't the only hammer action blaster available, because NERF Rebel also had the Sweet Revenge, which was a very similar blaster with very similar internals that I thought was pretty much better in every single way. And let's not forget, the Hammershot is one of the most moddable blasters out there in a sense. This thing had so many different aftermarket kits, cylinders, hammers, ways to increase the capacity to fire more foam darts before reloading, ways to decrease the capacity so you could fire other types of ammunition like the upcoming NERF Mega and Rival, different hammers like ones where you could prime them off your arm or other objects, clothing and so forth easier, or even different hammers that were more ergonomic for you to grip with one hand. And it's no surprise that the Hammershot is legendary, and nowadays you can get them in like 30 different flavors. What could even be done with a V2? After all, there are so many Hammershot derivatives now in 2024, and even if you just wanted more power, well, Dart Zone's got you covered with the Dart Zone Max Outlaw. What's the most important about the Hammershot is the legacy it left. Loved by many and feared by many more. Alright, where was I in this script again? I mean, I can't even find all the pages are... Oh right! It's time for our sponsor, Royal Match. Royal Match is a free downloadable, no ads match 3 puzzle game that you can download on your Android or iOS device right now. It's the perfect game to unwind and relax with while you help King Robert build up his kingdom from zero. Royal Match has thousands of levels, and it's constantly drip feeding you new gameplay mechanics to keep everything fresh. The idea is simple: match up 3 pieces and clear the level's goals within the allotted moves, or you lose. But of course, if you match up more than 3, especially between the different colors, you get different power-ups to help clear the field faster. And then chaining different items together also increases their effectiveness, and that's where things get really crazy. And it's a completely seamless experience because there is no ads, and even better, you can play the game entirely offline. And if you want to get a little competitive, you can add family and friends to your team, and that way you can see their progress and really race each other to see who's actually the best. So give Royal Match a shot. It's completely free and you can download it using my link down in the description or scan the QR code you see right now. It's relaxing, enjoyable, and I definitely wasn't playing a couple of levels in between every single take shooting this massive video. So thank you very much to Royal Match for sponsoring this video and help support the channel. Download the game today. It's crazy to imagine that both of these blasters came out at the same time at the start of NERF Zombie Strike, because what I'm about to show you is one of the coolest things that Hasbro ever made in NERF. Listen up, you primitive screwheads! This is my boomstick!
Now I swear, the next one of you primates even touches me.
But while the Hammershot did the whole one-handed blasting and sparked a whole legacy of flinging foam at the undead, the Sledgefire did something that NERF refused to ever do again. Make a appropriate break-action shotgun blaster that was super legit. And I mean true break action, because the Sledgefire primes when you open it up. You see, this breech-loading blaster came with 3 shells, each one holding 3 darts perfectly. Look at that, they don't stick past the front of the shell or anything like this. You could shove this in a pocket and you know it's gonna be safe. Due to the design here, you can actually load anywhere from 1 to 3 darts in each shell, and if you loaded 1 dart or 2 darts, you'd actually get a little bit of a velocity boost. But you take your shell, you load it in the Sledgefire, and they can go in pretty much every way. Flip the blaster up, and it is now primed and ready to go. You simply point it at the object and pull the trigger, and it fires the darts. And then, when you break it back open, it popped out the shell, usually not very aggressively. I gave it a little bit of English right there to have it pop out of the blaster, but it does loosen up the blaster so you can grab it, put it back in the stock. You know, if you have it facing upwards where it locks into place, you can very easily refill your shells on the fly when you have some downtime, and just repeat the process. And while shotguns maybe not the most useful thing for humans versus zombie, the Sledgefire is the best shotgun I think NERF has ever made. Seriously, the way this thing is designed, where it primes on opening it up, it makes it extremely efficient to use over and over again for a shotgun. Performance was under what you'd normally get with an elite blaster because it's firing 3 darts at once, and these shells were never designed for maximum distance. It's got a monstrous plunger tube and a really strong spring inside of it. So the shells barely grip the foam darts inside of them, and of course have air release holes all over. The seal between the plunger tube and the shell itself isn't exactly perfect. It's like they knew this thing was a sleeping monster, because you can mod the ever-loving crap out of the Sledgefire and turn it into a sniper rifle that's a shotgun. And this is one of the few times that the inaccuracy of the NERF Elite Dart would actually be beneficial, because that meant that your spread per shot was pretty good. It was completely random, but it was also really unpredictable. So in sense, it was the perfect shotgun. You got everything for about $30, and it was a shame that Hasbro utterly refused to put like Sledgefire upgrade packs or extra shells anywhere on store shelves. I mean, you could contact them and buy them off their very limited website. It was really hard to get extra shells, and of course these things were always lost, making fielding the Sledgefire a pretty hefty investment. If you don't like the shoulder stock, which is really comfortable in my opinion, just removing the bottom 2 screws right here, you could very easily remove it. That way you'd have kind of a pistol that you could put on you somewhere, and let's be fair, most of the barrel here is also pointless if you wanted to modify that. But if you cut the stock on there, this thing spins absolutely beautifully. One of the best spinning blasters in all of NERF. But just for practical reasons, I recommend you keep it on the blaster, because this makes reloading it much faster at the cost of it being a little bit longer. You can even modify the shell kicking spring in the blaster so it launched the shell out farther. That also wasn't always recommended, because then you would lose your shells easier. If they barely popped out of the cylinder or didn't pop out at all, you can easily just reach in, grab the shell, put it back in the stock, reload it from a dump pouch, and keep yourself in the fight. And while this is an odd color scheme in Zombie Strike. The whole blue and everything wasn't exactly used all that often. This is a Zombie Strike blaster, you can tell from the wrapped grip. And compared to the Hammershot, the Sledgefire is the first blaster that really does scream Zombie Strike. I mean, originally this was known as the Boomer Nova, and it came from what was going to be the Zombie Hunter line. Which means at one point, Zombie Strike was a very different yet very similar thing to what we got. But yeah, unsurprisingly, the Sledgefire isn't exactly the most optimal zombie hunting device. I mean, I know, like shotguns and stuff like that, it's just pretty much in every single zombie fiction ever. But the Sledgefire is slow. It doesn't hold very much ammo. I have to reload every single shot. It's a very technical reload at that, which is not exactly great for high pressure situations. And at the distances these things fire, you're more likely to hit one zombie with all 3 shots as you already hit 3 zombies, each with 1 dart. What it is good for is dunking on other human players, because this thing is very difficult to avoid. The Sledgefire is also one of the first things I ever saw in NERF that utilized 3D printing in the form of the laser gnome shells that would allow you to fire different projectiles out of your Sledgefire. Because again, NERF Mega and NERF Rival were just on the horizon for the entirety of the ecosystem. But you could also get shells with long barrels that would utilize that plunger tube and get some insane velocities. Or skip the shells altogether. Just put a long barrel on the front of the Sledgefire and glue it in there, increase the seal between the entire system, and make this thing hit ridiculously hard with a spring upgrade. That lever really working for mechanical advantage, so even when you have this system maxed out, it's really pleasurable to prime and shoot.
I don't like how you said that. I don't like how I said that.
And even with a single barrel that doesn't use the shells, you could just load multiple darts into the barrel. A little bit slower, but definitely more efficient when it comes to range. There's so much you can do with the Sledgefire platform, with the only real problem being this hinge right here that primes the entire thing. Yeah, those tend to break if you overwork them a little bit too much. And that's a very difficult thing to fix without pretty much replacing the entirety of the blaster. So what needs to be done for a Sledgefire Mark II besides fixing that one issue? Well, we never got a dual barreled, like a double break action. Why? Why did we never get that? It'd be really easy to do with like just the stock thing, because the grip actually has internals in it. This is where the spring and the plunger rod are, but you could very easily just double this and have this grip here or some kind of thing here, and just move the actual firing trigger and mechanism back a little bit. Just pin these together. That way you can still break it, load 2 shells in, because everybody wants the Doom Super Shotgun. Don't have to mess with any of the internals right here, and you just have a trigger linkage between 2 triggers. And that's so easy to do, and yet Hasbro never did it. And they also never touched the Sledgefire shell ever again. For some reason, even when they brought back the idea of a shell-fed shotgun that fired 3 darts, they went with a completely different shell design with the Trilogy and the Shell Strike, and it was a much inferior shell in my opinion, and really the Trilogy was just a really bad blaster in general. The Sledgefire and the Hammershot are peak NERF Zombie Strike, and that is the start of the entire line, and these were the only 2 blasters released in Zombie Strike in 2013. So the question is, where do they go from here? 2014, new year, new love for NERF Zombie Strike. And besides the revolver and the shotgun, what's the hottest zombie hunting implement? Well, that would be the crossbow. Just pretend that it's this, cause you'd never find these things with the bow arms, and the bow arms did literally nothing for the Crossfire Bow. Hasbro has a patent on something called the Intelligent Air Restrictor, or Smart AR, as we've kind of known to call it in the hobby, where you can load multiple darts up at the front of it without any kind of revolver system, and yet not only does it fire 1 dart after another, if you skipped barrels or only partially loaded it, it would still be able to fire those darts. It's a really cool system that is the Achilles heel in a bunch of different designs, unfortunately.
The Crossfire Bow, with its 4 dart capacity, helps you eliminate the threat quickly.
The actual design of the Crossfire Bow feels a little off, because you notice it doesn't have the wrapped grip. I mean, that's Zombie Strike, that's what we know and love, and nothing on this blaster feels like it was old or put back together, serviced in any way. It looks like a production thing, and that makes you think this probably was never meant to be a Zombie Strike blaster, but they made it one anyway because we need stuff for Zombie Strike. The included bow arms had a string that ran through the priming grip, and honestly were completely, they don't do anything. The spring doesn't contribute to the actual performance of the blaster anyway, because this is a Springer blaster, and they were just bulky things that eventually got lost and thrown away at every Goodwill ever. I seriously don't think I own a single Crossfire Bow that has the bow arms. Simply load 4 darts into the 4 open barrels at the front of the Crossfire Bow here. Notice they stick out a little bit, which is extremely annoying. That means these darts can get worn and destroyed before you even fire them, and then you use this kind of weird AR-style priming grip thing, and that cocks the blaster, and fire it, and it fires a dart. Pull it back again, fires again, and you can keep doing that until it's empty. This blaster is incredibly thin, which does mean it worms its way into the heart of more than a few nerfers. But unfortunately, the Smart AR system means you can't really modify this thing all that much because the air restrictors are built in such a way to only let a certain amount of air flow through the system, and if you overpower that, at best really diminish the range of your shot because obviously it's meant to restrict airflow, and at worst just kind of start shooting all the darts out at once at very lethargic ranges because the plunger tube, there's just not enough airflow or anything in this to fire 4 darts at once, and obviously if you remove that, well, then you do have that really lackluster shotgun. Not unusable, mind you, but also not very good. The grip is also pretty small. I mean, my small hands can grab it just fine, and I think it's more than comfortable, but I'm also maxing out what this grip can do, and I know what you're thinking. It's like, oh, it's a toy for children, Walcom. Obviously, there are so many, if not the majority of Nerf blasters that are comfortable for both kids and adults alike. So there's no excuse for a poorly designed grip. It's got a stock attachment point right there so you can put your favorite stock on it because it is a kind of tactical crossbow. It's got a beautiful kind of front iron sight pip thing on it that I happen to like a lot, and a tactical rail at the top to add what other optic or flashlight or whatever you want on this thing. What would I change to make this a little bit more useful in the future? Well, that would be an internal magazine. I mean, I know it's a crossbow and it's supposed to be a single shot, and it would be cool to just have a really good single shot crossbow from Nerf, but if this was gonna be the multi-shot crossbow, internal magazine would be great. 3 or 4 shots is all you really need, and they could fit something like this in this space, and I think that would be a very good tune to the Crossfire Bow to make it a little bit better as a Mark II. You could even make it like an internal magazine-fed bungee blaster or something like that, where the bow arms actually did something. But for 20 bucks, when you can buy like the $8 Nerf Elite Triad and get 3 shots in a pistol and instead of 4 shots in this gigantic thing, yeah, the Crossfire Bow wasn't exactly great. I mean, this is half of a Nerf Roughcut 2x4 for like the same price, and that does limit its appeal. You know what was cool? The Hammershot. You know what's even cooler? The smaller Hammershot. The Zombie Strike Doublestrike is pushing the boundaries of what you can do with the hammer priming system, because this thing is obviously like a compact little Derringer revolver style thing. It's, well, compact. I mean, this is basically the hammer primed Jolt. And yet, even at this small size, still included a Nerf tactical N-Strike rail.
Keep the Doublestrike handy for those times when you need a little extra help.
This little thing is super comfortable in my opinion, and very easy to use even with small hands. But it isn't a revolver, because this is a front-loading 2-shot Smart AR system, so you can load either barrel and fire 1 dart, load both, and you can fire 1 dart after another. There is a super big flaw with this design, though, that is very irksome, and that is the fact that darts stick out past the barrels, which means if you actually put this thing in your pocket and ran around with it, you're going to absolutely destroy those darts before they have the chance to be flung into the horde. But look at that, the return of the wrapped grip. That's how you know it's Zombie Strike, kids. And of course, you could absolutely dual wield this thing, and they did sell it in a 2-pack later on in a different color scheme. And it's roughly about the same velocity of the Hammershot, so Really, the Doublestrike is all awesome, and for $10 you got quite a bit here. While this could be used as a sidearm, it's more of a tertiary style blaster, a thing you have somewhere on your in the last hopes that, well, if anybody's gonna take you out, it's gonna be you. Mod-wise, it has a similar problem to all smart AR systems that we've come to know and love through the Crossfire Bow, and that's, well, yeah, you can't really overpower it too much, otherwise it just kind of loosely fires both darts due to overgassing, and if you were to remove the smart AR system, it would be a really anemic two-shot shotgun. Not saying you can't do it, it's just that it wouldn't be optimal for this blaster. But the design actually looks more revolver-like than any other NERF revolver. Even though it doesn't have a cylinder, it has the shape of a kind of cylinder right there, and that does mean cosmetically, this thing would look super awesome when it's dressed up. And in a Generation 2, there's not a whole lot that could be revisited on the Doublestrike other than making sure that when you actually load the darts into the barrels protect the dart. Therefore, you could actually keep this thing like in a pocket or in a pouch or something on you and not have to worry about destroying your darts. And yes, this is another blaster where having more of them just means more fun. So while you can just dual wield it, where's the fun in that? Get like 8 or 10 of them. Again, at $10 a piece. They went on sale regularly, and it's not like you can only have just one. And even if you've got small hands, the Doublestrike will probably fit you, and for that, I give it extremely high marks. Really quick, we gotta talk about NERF Vortex now, because for some reason, NERF Vortex came to NERF Zombie Strike. This is a Vortex disc. It's a little bit different than the Foam Dart you've come to know and love, but this did kind of hit its peak just before NERF Elite came out, because when Vortex was released, well, NERF N-Strike was the only thing, and these discs fly a lot farther than a NERF N-Strike Streamline dart. They just kind of hang in the air and glide ever so graciously towards, well, let's be clear, probably a wall or something, because they do curve, they spin through the air, and normally it's kind of a predictable spin, so not only could you bank this off objects, I mean, it could hit the corner of a wall or something and just keep going, losing a little bit of its momentum each bounce, but you could also bank shots, and that might be the greatest thing about NERF Vortex. If somebody's behind an object, you could very easily hit targets behind that with a kind of boomerang effect, and it was very effective at that. It's a foam edge disc with the center being kind of a plasticky rubber. It's a really nice design projectile that honestly NERF didn't do a whole lot with. And that's where one of my favorite Vortex blasters of all time comes in, the Fusefire. This thing, man, it amazes me what NERF was capable of with their design language, but this is not Zombie Strike at all. This is an alien weapon. This is futuristic sci-fi, but for some reason, it's got NERF Zombie Strike on it, despite looking factory new. Now, while this is a little bit chunky, it is classified as a pistol blaster, and it's a very attractive one at that. You've got a 5-shot kind of disc holder up at the front. This is just to hold loose ammo, but it was very optimal at the time, and you've got the coolest feature of any of the Vortex blasters, in my opinion, a 5-shot internal mag where you just kind of stick the disc up in there.
What is wrong with you?
Which you just kind of did again, and again, and once more.
You're serious.
And let's give it the 5th one. So we have 5 shots now loaded inside of our Fusefire. You can pull that back, it loads a disc and automatically springs back forward. And then of course we can load one more into it for it being one of the only NERF blasters where you can do a 5+1 or 6-shot total. And the entire gimmick of the Fusefire, besides the fact that it does what it does, is that you can turn on some LEDs on it, and it's got the 2 green LEDs up at the top that you can see there. This is also a tactical rail for some reason, but then it's also got UV LEDs inside of the system that charges up the included glow-in-the-dark discs. So for 20 bucks, you actually got quite a bit here, and this thing holds a very special place in my heart, because that ability to top this blaster up on the fly, basically still having it pointed at your target, pull the trigger, fires the disc, pull that back, have that spring forward. This one's a little bit old, but then while it's still pointed at your target, ready to shoot at any time, you could top it back up and you could keep that going as long as you had discs. And they are discs, they're very easy to have in a dump pouch and stuff like that. You don't really need to worry about the orientation of loading them or anything. It is just so good at that. Yeah, it's a bit big for a pistol, but you could carry 6 shots in the blaster, 5 shots up front. That's 11 shots before you have to do anything. It's so good. This is a primary pistol-sized blaster in NERF. Yeah, it's not the highest rate of fire, although you can rattle off those shots pretty quick, in my opinion, and just as quickly replenish them. You just don't get that in NERF very often, and that gives this a very special niche. Yeah, you can make a gigantic holster and keep this on you, but if you had somebody in your squad that had this thing, had a handful of discs in their hand while they're firing this thing and topping it back up, it could keep the zombies at bay for quite some time while everybody else scavenges and reloads.
We know about the loads!
And you can modify these systems. I mean, the torsion spring propulsion mechanism inside of most Vortex blasters, all of them seemingly have both a down powering option because there's like a screw that holds the torsion spring in place, so you can actually lower it, but it also has a spot to increase it. Like, they couldn't really figure out at the factory how hard these things should hit, so they just had a generic plate that they use for every single one of these. But if you do modify this thing to hit a little bit harder and shoot a little bit faster, be warned that this priming carriage right here tends to break at the front of it, especially if you happen to dry fire it if you remove locks and stuff like that. So it can get a bit dangerous. Make sure you reinforce that. But man, the Fusefire is so flippin' good. We can't overstate the fact that this is not Zombie Strike at all.
Enemies can't hide in the light.
That doesn't mean it's a bad blaster by any means. I just mean it's a bad Zombie Strike blaster. And what more could they do with this system? Another big issue with the Fusefire is that it happens to bind up in the magazine pretty easily. Now, if you just kept this thing lubed up, you'd probably never have an issue, and if it does jam up, you could very easily clear it by just grabbing a long implement and pressing on the disc to kind of unseat it.
What do you think you're doing?
And most of the time, that would just let the magazine work again. You wouldn't have to worry about it. Sometimes it would break catastrophically and you'd have to actually kind of pry out the disc in there. It doesn't happen all that often. In fact, I don't think it ever happened to mine, which is a reliability issue, which will get you eaten by zombies. But I'm sure that's a system that they could redesign. They could have like an opening magazine flap where you can very easily access it if something does go wrong. And honestly, maybe the thing I wish the most out of the Fusefire is that they would make like a carbine or rifle style that's like 10, 15 rounds, covers something done. And maybe even make it semi-auto flywheeler so we have like a NERF Vortex P90 looking thing. It's a beautiful idea that was executed pretty well in my opinion, maybe not under Zombie Strike, and I wish I could say the same for the rest of the options in the Zombie Strike Vortex line. All right, let's just be blunt. This is one of the NERF Vortex blasters of all time. The Ricochet is as small as a Vortex blaster got. It is meant to be the Jolt of the Vortex line, even though the original NERF Vortex Proton isn't exactly big. Spoilers, it's better than this thing in every single possible way. And at $8, you're asking for a lot when the Proton was still on shelves for 10. No rails, nothing, barely even a grip, but it is super wide because it's meant to shoot the Vortex disc. And while this does have like the Zombie Strike color scheme, more so than even the Fusefire, this thing does share the same design aesthetics as the Fusefire, which means it doesn't fit into the Zombie Strike line at all. This isn't a sub-series, this is just NERF Zombie Strike. To use the Ricochet, you just kind of front-loaded a disc in there, you pulled that back, you can't even push it forward or anything like that. You pull the trigger, it fires the disc, you push that forward, and you repeat the process. This is a front loader. The Proton, you pulled back the tray, loaded a disc in the tray, pushed it back forward, and it was rear loading. It was much better. The Proton's one of the best blasters in the entirety of the line, despite being the cheapest and most accessible. This, not so much. It's a very anemic shot, and due to the design of this, it's the only Vortex blaster that uses a typical power spring that you would find with pretty much any other blaster, because it literally just pulls back a spring-loaded arm that when you pull the trigger, it just punches the disc out. About as simple as it can be. That does give it the niche of like, yeah, you can actually modify this thing. I say that loosely because it's a small shell and very fragile internals, and that also means that this thing doesn't impart a spin to the disc at all. it just kicks it out of the front of the blaster, which means it's kind of more accurate. And again, that is a niche. It does something different that any other Vortex blaster doesn't do. That doesn't mean it's good, and it doesn't mean it fits in Zombie Strike. And while $8 is the cheapest, again, 10 would get you far better in NERF Vortex. So how would you improve upon the design? Throw it in the trash and just get a Proton. Or our next blaster if you really want the front-loading NERF Vortex thing. Yeah, the NERF Zombie Strike Ripshot is a little bit bigger, but man, is it super comfortable and cool looking. This is more or less the same exact idea as the Ricochet, but in typical Vortex fashion. It has a torsion spring, you can do all the torsion spring things to it, while still being slide-based and, well, being a compact pistol. And yeah, this is bigger than the Ricochet, but it's also not that bad, unless you're trying to holster it, in which you, might have a problem with the big grip guard and everything on it. What's funny is all this Vortex stuff is setting up the fact that Zombie Strike will do literally anything, and HVZ is one of the only game modes in all of NERF where having different ammo types is basically mandatory. Now, I don't know of an HVZ that does anything special for Vortex discs, especially now when they're a little bit more expensive because they haven't been produced in like 8 years, but it is really cool to see different ammo types in the ecosystem. This does not also fit Zombie Strike in any way other than the color scheme. I do like the splash of white on here, and the grip, I can't understate this enough, is extremely comfortable. This blaster's wicked weird though, so much like the Ricochet, it is a front loader for better or worse. Kind of locks the disc in there, and then of course you can pull that back, and then of course you can just make sure the disc is all the way in there. You really gotta make sure the disc is all the way in there because it has like a disc lock thing, and then you just pull this back, and it's freaking annoying, but now it's primed and ready to go. You just pull the trigger, fires the disc out, and spins, does all the normal things that, you know, you'd expect from a blaster like this, except for the fact that it's dubbed fast firing on the package. And how does a front loader be fast firing? Well, if you actually do get a disc in there and make sure it's all the way down in there, and that will start to hurt your fingers a little bit. If you hold down the trigger while priming the thing back, it fires when it reaches the rearmost position. That's fast firing. I mean, it does something different, but that doesn't mean it does it well. And funny enough, this was $10, so it was still only $2 more than what the Ricochet was asking for. Honestly, it's not bad. It has a niche, it works pretty okay. Front loading it is gonna hurt after a while, and you have to really make sure the disc is all the way down in there. Just get a Proton. Just use the NERF Vortex Proton. It is so much better. But I do like this thing. And it really does remind me of like the pistol from Halo. It just has that kind of feel with the chunky grip and stuff to it. I don't know. Now this blaster needs absolutely no introduction, and it is one of the times where Zombie Strike just took an existing blaster and just colored it Zombie Strike and sold it as Zombie Strike. But the thing with the Zombie Strike Jolt is that it was only sold in a targeting set, and it did include one thing that elevated the Jolt up to slightly better than Jolt standards, and that is the inclusion of a snap-on piece that added a very loose ideal of a reticle, a sight if you will, onto the Jolt, but also gave it onboard dart storage. Not that you can really use it, like, oh, I can stuff this thing in my pocket with these darts that are just gonna fall out and stuff, but it could do it, and if you wanted to practice your NERF accuracy with a Jolt indoors in your own office range, well, the targeting set did give you that ability. I mean, the problem is that this attachment always gets lost. The Jolt looks freaking awesome, by the way. I love this color scheme on the Jolt, and it's one of the more detailed painted Jolts out there, but the little attachment gets lost, it breaks off, and it's the entire reason why you'd pick up the set. The little plastic targets it came with aren't exactly great, and for the 10, 15 bucks they were asking for the set, it wasn't bad, and it's gonna be remembered as one of the better Jolts there was. And I do mean Jolt. I mean not like everything is a Jolt or, you know, Jolt-esque things. No, it's literally a Jolt with Zombie Strike on it. And you gotta love that, especially before they started giving us a dozen new Jolts a year. It's a really neat idea. It's not exactly something that you have to go out and find. It wasn't exactly important at the time, but it was cool that it was even an option. The funny funny thing about shotguns is they're like the first thing you think of when you dream of zombie. Even though, again, they aren't the most practical, but the Roughcut 2x4 kinda has a room clearing ability that does make it somewhat useful in humans versus zombies, even though it's a relatively large blaster for only 8 shots in front loading, and again, smart AR system, so your modification mileage may vary. But Zombie Strike gave us a Roughcut 2-pack out of the Elite line, and man, these are hot! This one, as you can see, has been modified, but is the typical Zombie Strike scheme you know and love. The bright green, the wood kind of grip thing, and yeah, it's the exact same thing you'd expect from a Roughcut 2x4. Nothing special there, no changes outside of that. And then they also started this weird orange Zombie Strike thing, which they will revisit this color scheme a few more times. Load in 8 darts, or really whatever darts you want in the smart AR system. This thing does have Slingfire, but you can prime it back, push it forward, fire it. It will fire both shots. If you pull the trigger slowly, you can get like one, then another shot, because it does have 2 plunger tubes. Kind of like that. Very difficult to do deliberately though, and gonna be very much impossible to do when you're running away from the horde of the undead. But if you hold that trigger down, you can dump, kinda, I mean, you can't do it fast, that's for sure. But you can just dump out all 8 darts, and it does have a pretty decent spread if you were trying to actually just fan the thing off, and that could be somewhat useful, but it's still 8 shots in a thing that's this large, and while you can just kind of clip this to you in different way, it's not exactly optimal. But being optimal isn't exactly the entire purpose of Zombie Strike, and this thing is perfectly serviceable, and you did get 2 of them in one pack for like 25, 30 bucks, which is really nice for, well, shotguns. Now with the N-Strike Nightfinder and the N-Strike Elite Firestrike, pretty much everybody kind of wanted a slide-based option for that, and it took a couple of years, but we finally got that with the NERF Zombie Strike Sidestrike. Now the Jolt and the Roughcut are reshells. The Sidestrike is an entirely new thing that, again, it literally says N-Strike Elite on it. This wasn't meant to be a Zombie Strike blaster, and yet it was released in the Zombie Strike line. It is literally a Fire Strike, but it has a top priming slide on it. But more important than the actual blaster is the fact that this thing came with a holster that I couldn't find for this video, but it looked like this. The holster was cool is that it was a holster that came with the blaster bespoke for said blaster. Not only did the Sidestrike hold 2 extra darts on it, much like the Firestrike, but the holster held an extra 4, so you would have 7 shots in one complete package that you could mount on your body? Not bad. And the Firestrike platform is relatively easy to mod, so you could turn one of these things into like a designated marksman sidearm. You'd have to deliberately switch to it. You couldn't just draw offhanded with like a Hammershot or a Doublestrike and use that as a sidearm, but this you could switch to and maybe get a little bit more range and precision out of your shots if you did modify the blaster. As you can see, this one already has a brass barrel in it. It's got a tiny grip, but it's perfectly comfortable for me, and overall the blaster is really nice to use. Modifying it, like I said, you can do it, and it is optimal for that, but the indirect priming linkage here, because keep in mind there's a rod down here, and you're priming this, so there's like a linkage between the two. That could run you some problems with really maximized spring loads over something direct prime like the Firestrike or the Nightfinder. So it's not the best at doing that, but it's still really good, and I mean, it had a holster. And that was really the entire claim to fame for the Sidestrike. It had a holster.
Holster? Oh yeah.
And when brassed up and loaded up and everything's good to go, it does make it a very competent switchable secondary sidearm kind of thing. And the funniest part is this was reshelled a bunch of times after Zombie Strike without the holster. Oh, look at that! A new side series in NERF Zombie Strike called Z Squad, and the entire gimmick with this line wasn't exactly like physical, like the thing didn't do anything gimmicky, but the idea was that it was like zombie curing stuff. I don't know if any game actually included that, but the darts had little like syringe marks and stuff on them, and while you are shooting darts at zombies to, I assume, cure the zombification or eliminate said zombie, You could also maybe make the idea in lore that these darts had restorative properties to maybe save humans that were already bit and infected before they turned.
Let's go practice medicine.
The other gimmick with Z Squad is that these were all reshell blasters, and we're going to start with the clear shot. Sir not appearing in this video because I couldn't find one. But that's okay, there's not much to talk about because the clear shot is a reshell of it. Not even a elite blaster. This is the reshell of an N-Strike blaster, a dart tag blaster actually, called the Stormfire. And its whole deal is it's basically a slide-based Night Finder, but instead of being slide-based compact like the Sidestrike, it's a slide instead of the direct pullback. So it's still kind of direct pullback, but it was a big hunky slide. They did add a little bit extra like color scheme painting to it that made it look pretty cool. And it also included the shot blast scope from the Super Soaker, and that's a really cool scope. It's like an ACOG looking thing, and that was a nice addition to a blaster that's like a $15, $20 purchase. But there were no changes to the internals, which meant that this thing had about a 30-foot range, which was not good in 2014 after we had grown accustomed to what NERF Elite and even Zombie Strike itself had been giving us. And it had decent mod potential at that. But the fact of the matter is, for 15 bucks, it's not bad, but you are mostly buying it just for the scope. Speaking of just for the scope, holy crap, the Longshot got a re-release in Zombie Strike Z Squad. Now, the Longshot is important because it's one of the most modded blasters in the entirety of NERF history. It was the first clip system blaster, or a blaster that took magazines, in NERF, coming out in like 2006. While they did make the original blue one and then the yellow one, there was a gap. And that gap meant that if you wanted to get this out-of-print, highly desirable blaster that could hit like 200 FPS back in the day and be mag-fed, of course it took a lot of work or very expensive custom parts, you could do it, well, you'd have to go on eBay and pick one up for like 60 to 80 bucks, sometimes more. I know because I was hunting for one at the time, couldn't find one in a Goodwill ever, and they were commanding some pretty serious prices. This is one of the only times I've seen Hasbro re-release a blaster and make it almost optimal for nerfers, like somebody was paying attention. Because the Z Squad Longshot included a 12-round mag, it's pretty cool, uncommon thing to have at this time. 12-round mags aren't exactly super common. Included the scope, which is the coolest part of the Longshot. Didn't have the bipod, although it had the molding for where the bipod would click in, but you'd remove that anyway if you were modifying it for pump action, and didn't include the useless Longshot front gun for a cheaper price. And the paint scheme is fantastic. I love this version of the Longshot. And for 35 bucks, you got, for better or worse, a normal, complete Longshot with no changes to the internals whatsoever, which meant all the things you'd want to do to it are easy to do. It's really the only time they ever made a blaster like, yeah, we know this thing's kind of hard to get, we're gonna re-release it with none of the extra stuff, sell it at a discounted price, and it is perfect for out-of-the-box modding. Like, you know Hasbro didn't do that on purpose, but also feels like somebody snuck that in there. But it was an N-Strike blaster, which meant it hit like a 40-foot range under that of the Elite 70, 80-foot performance, and that's a bit disappointing, but let's face it, you bought that blaster because you're gonna modify it. It's super cool that Hasbro even did that. I'm just saying, I wish they would do that more often. So 2014 is the year after NERF Mega kind of made its debut. Not the old school Mega Darts that they called them, but the new Mega a la the Centurion. And right after the Centurion, we got the Magnus. And right after the Magnus, we got the Zombie Strike Magnus Dual Pack. For a discounted price, you got 2 new Magnus colorways, which is kind of nutty because the Magnus was a new blaster at the time. You got a teal one, which matched the aesthetic of not only the Longshot, but also the not yet released Doublestrike Dual Pack. And you got the orange one. See, this colorway kind of makes its appearance here and there in Zombie Strike. The Magnus is one of the better NERF Mega blasters that they ever made, and again, is another ammo type brought into NERF Zombie Strike. And historically, NERF Mega is used to defeat bigger zombies that can't be tagged out by standard elite darts. Pull that massive slide back and it's got a 3-round internal mega magazine. And this thing was so much better than the Centurion before it wasn't funny. Close that slide, you've got a shot. It fires a mega dart and it fires it really well, and you can just repeat the process for 3 shots before you have to top it up again. And while this is a big stinking pistol, it is a big stinking pistol that would hold 3 shots and you could keep it on you and, well, really make those mega zombies a thing of the past. Yeah, the Magnus might have slightly fallen out of favor because it's like 3 times the size of a Big Shock or a Talon or something like that, where if you only need the 1 mega dart, why carry something this big around? This is still a really good blaster, and if you play HVZ, you probably want to have one of these somewhere in your arsenal, because if you want to focus more on Mega, this is one of the better ones you could use. It's much thinner than something like the upcoming Cyclone Shock in the Mega line, and it's just awesome. Not to mention how many people cut these things up and undermount them on their primary blasters, so they have this kind of slide-based, under-mounted grenade launcher thing that fired Mega whenever there was a special zombie that required Mega without having to actually draw out an entirely separate blaster. If you were serious about busting Zeds, that's what you had. And this teal color scheme? Really cool. I like it. I like it a lot. It doesn't even match the Sledgefire. The Sledgefire was like the only thing that came in that blue, but this teal hits hard. But let's end 2014 on a high note, and a very high note that I have a personal attachment to, because this is, again, back early days when I started my channel, when I started reviewing NERF blasters, and, well, I love lever actions. And the Slingfire is one of the few NERF lever actions there is. Open that up, pop that bad boy in there, close that, and yeah, it's a lever action. It is super fun, but the Slingfire got its name for the fact that you can one-hand these things. Or sling it, if you will. The actual priming grip lever thing here is really weird. It's like a rubbery plastic with a metal insert that keeps its rigidity. I mean, that means that this thing can bend and twist and not be aligned properly. This is a game changer, because that's bolted onto what is essentially a geared retaliator. The whole system is clutch, so you can't really break it or anything like that. Like, I just obviously short strike, it's still fine. It works perfectly fine. And this is peak Zombie Strike aesthetic. Notice the wood stock and the wrapped grip. Proper zombie hunting material here. And also, like, one of the best lengths of pull on a stock NERF blaster there is. This stock is legendary. It has been incorporated into so many builds over the last decade, it isn't funny. And what keeps the Slingfire super competitive, especially at the time, was the fact that it was magazine fed. Not something commonly seen on, you know, lever actions. And it is a little awkward to reload because the magazine releases all the way up there, but really cool to see on a blaster like this. And you can, I mean, it's a little difficult, but you can really slam off shots with this thing. Like, really, my only complaint is that this, like, foregrip area up here isn't exactly optimal. You've got the random, like, industrial bolting and fabricated parts and all that stuff. You even got more wrapping up here at the front of this thing. Just amazing looking, and a tactical rail at the top if you want to add a scope to it, because why not? And of course, a sling loop on the back of the stock and a sling loop up here to keep this on your butt. The Slingfire is so freaking cool, man. This is what you'd expect out of Zombie Strike. In fact, Zombie Strike is seeming more and more cowboy themed as we go on. Now, my claim with this blaster is that I documented the fact that out of the box, the 2 that I bought originally, because of course you're gonna have 2, I mean, you could dual wield it, they had green bolts inside. The green bolted ones that I got first really underperformed. The bolt had a looser grip on the dart, so these things were like lever action jolts. Very disappointing, to the point where I contacted Hasbro because there were no range claims for the Slingfire, and they told me it is supposed to perform up to elite standard, which mine didn't, and they did request them back, and that's where the black bolted ones came in. So it is something to think about if you are buying a Slingfire with no plans of modifying it. If you see that green bolt, be prepared for lackluster performance. What's cool is that, like, because this is a geared system, it is way more efficient than any kind of retaliator or anything like that. This is a very, very light prime that basically anybody can use as long as you can stretch your arm forward far enough. And there were lots of modifications for this thing. Not only were there cosmetic kits to really fix this short front barrel that is really awkward and makes me feel weird, but of course metal internals, metal gears, metal priming grips that feel a lot better. There's a lot you can do with the Zombie Strike Slingfire, and it is really, really fun. Maybe not the most practical blaster ever. What can you fix with a Gen 2? Well, we don't have to think about that too much because Hasbro actually did make a second Slingfire in the Zombie Strike line that we will talk about shortly. Otherwise, without buying aftermarket parts, modifying the Slingfire can be tricky because of the geared system inside of this thing, having a clutch and all that stuff. If you try to overpower the spring inside of it, that clutch isn't going to be very happy with you, which means you really do have to buy some really expensive aftermarket parts in order to make this thing work, or disable the clutch, which could lead to a broken Slingfire. So while it is super cool, it wasn't exactly readily moddable for a lot of people, and that was a shame because it is, again, peak Zombie Strike NERF. And the Slingfire brings 2014 to a close, and while there were some hits, there were some problems starting to develop. Smart AR systems are making their appearance in a lot of blasters in the line, and there were a lot of reshells on top of a lot of blasters that really didn't fit Zombie Strike. They were like, oh, we have this new line, so we're just gonna throw a bunch of brand new stuff in there. With Zed Squad, it kind of made sense, but the Vortex stuff really didn't. That was not really Zombie Strike at all. And then there were things like the Crossfire Bow and the Sidestrike, which the Sidestrike literally says NERF Elite on it. So it was never meant to be a Zombie Strike blaster, which is well, it kind of devalues from the line a little bit, but we still got some really good stuff, and hopefully 2015 brings us even better things. Talk about an underrated NERF Zombie Strike blaster that didn't exactly review the best at the time and yet was still absolutely everywhere. Meet the Flipfury.
Know when to flip your lid.
You will find one of these things rotting at pretty much every single thrift store you ever go to, and I think this design sold out more than the Maverick, and for good reason, because the gimmick the Flipfury has is really satisfying to use. Ah yes, we still have the wrapped grip. Now I'm not gonna lie, this thing is absolutely massive, and yet it only holds 12 shots, and it's pretty much just the double strong arm. The strong arm was one of the first blasters released in the N-Strike Elite line, so a double version, not exactly a bad idea. However, this design is very similar to the X-Shot XS, or whatever they called the XS before was the XS. X-Shot had been playing around with this design way before NERF did, and while it's a predominantly orange blaster, it's not exactly the same orange as the Zombie Strike we've come to know when it is orange Zombie Strike. But it is unmistakably Zombie Strike. You've got the wrapped grip, you've got this kind of industrial fabricated from cobbled together parts thing going on. You have this weird like track that's a gripped guard, and also so you can like set the blaster down flat, I guess. I don't exactly know what NERF is thinking about that, but it doesn't exactly matter because this thing is sweet. This design is really something special, even if it was wholesale copied from X-Shot. So obviously we've got 2 cylinders here and 2 triggers. Now each cylinder holds 6 shots, which is exactly what the strong arm did. The top trigger is your firing trigger, and of course this is your priming slide. The bottom trigger, which is really easy even for my small hands to access, flips the barrels, and it is such a satisfying mechanic and is so much better than what X-Shot was trying to do, and it isn't even funny. The problem is if you pull it too fast, it doesn't work, so you do have to kind of get a feel for it, but once you do, it's very easy to flip reliably, and this is an important mechanic that makes this blaster actually pretty sweet. Once you've got the cylinder locked into place, you pull that back, you fire a dart. If you hold down the trigger, you can slam fire it, which is super cool. And then of course, flip it to what would be your other preloaded cylinder, and then you can reload the other one if you have a lull in the action, which is very, useful. I know this thing is way too big to be like a sidearm, but as a secondary or even a primary, have it clipped somewhere on you, that has a lot of utility when you can have the thing ready to be fired at the enemy while also being able to reload it and of course have the ability to swap between both things. The other problem being that if you don't fully load the cylinder, it can be really difficult to make sure you're on the right chamber when you flip. So it's not the most useful thing ever, but it is really cool. And that slam fire utilization means that this thing can kind of dump, because of course, you can fire it as fast as you can do that, and you can have all 6 shots out before the first dart even hits the ground. Extremely comfortable grip. I mean, this is obviously a popular blaster in the line, even if a lot of people didn't like it, because it's a kind of expensive $20, $25 blaster, especially for a 12 shot. Not the greatest thing. Works exceptionally well and has its own niche and satisfying gimmick, which makes the Flipfury a really compelling entry in Zombie Strike, even if it isn't the most practical, but at least the aesthetic is there. Modification-wise, there practically isn't any, because it's basically a strong arm, and strong arms, you can't really modify them, and if you do modify them, they tend to break. What you have is pretty much what you get with the Flipfury. It does have a tactical rail at the top of it, and that's really everything. It's a very simplistic blaster, but if you do want some additional usage, you really want this thing to be somewhat special in your loadout? Well, remember when I said it wasn't really exactly a sidearm? Well, you could make it one. You could make this an offhand drawable, primable, fireable blaster, because this little spot right here connected to the slide means that you could have a loop, like a sling around it, one point down here, one point up there, and kind of punch to draw the thing, which is genius. I don't know if Hasbro planned on that, but by the location of those 2 hooks, yeah, they had to have. The Flipfury got kind of a bad rap, and a lot of people don't exactly like it nowadays either, but it is actually a really good blaster, and if you have the chance to get your hands on one, I highly, highly recommend it. Unlike the next thing we're going to talk about. On paper, the Doominator should be a slam dunk. It is the quad strong arm that's also pump action and has some really neat little gimmicks to that as well, while keeping the same spirit of the Flipfury in mind, because it has a dual-fingered trigger right here that will flip between 4 cylinders. That is rad as heck. They are still front-loading cylinders, and 2 of them do clip into this kind of carousel here, so sometimes when you thrift the Doominator, not only does it not have the pump grip because that is removable, but it also might be missing the 2 side cylinders, but together, you get a really cool looking thing. I mean, like this, I don't know what this is supposed to be. It's obviously not a stock. You can't stock this. There is no stock. But as a brace for another point of contact, works well. Pump action, the 2 finger. This thing is really freaking cool. It really should be a lot better than it is. It even has a tactical rail at the top, and it has the same kind of tracky thing that the Flipfury had. Perfect Zombie Strike aesthetics. You've got the wood, you've got the wrapped grip, and you've got this kind of fabricated design from lots of different machined parts. Really, really good. So you've got 4 6-shot cylinders for a total of 24 shots, which is more than enough for a primary, but obviously not magazine fed, which may be a little bit better. But you have a similar gimmick to where you can empty one of the cylinders, flip it to the next one, and although it rotates in the wrong direction for this, in my opinion, you can still easily reload these things on the fly and keep yourself in the action, which compared to having to refill magazines, if those happen to run out, that's a little bit better, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to have one of these things on your squad for that exact purpose. Not exactly the best at keeping fire going over long periods of time, but having somebody who can easily cover you and at least reload a couple of shots and then fire, and Slingfire makes that a little bit easier. If you don't load all the cylinders, at least you can just dump all of them and hope your shots go where they need to. I mean, there is some utility there that would make an argument for the Doominator to be useful. The pump grip actually unscrews, and this is a part that does commonly get lost, and you can attach it to either the left or right side of the blaster, depending on if you're left or right-handed, for added tacticalness. I mean, there's not a whole lot of Nerf blasters you could do this with, and this is really comfortable. The other way is not so comfortable because when you prime it, you're probably gonna bust your thumb against the rest of the blaster. Like another 1/4 of an inch would have been better, Hasbro. And yeah, hold down the trigger, you got Slingfire. Really good to have, especially on something where you can effortlessly empty the cylinders. And these are in fact standard strong arm cylinders. So you can take these out and pop them in a strong arm. And while they aren't meant to be removable and reinserted in the actual blaster, technically you could use strong arm cylinders in this thing. Modification wise, same problem. It doesn't really have a whole lot because it's still internally basically a strong arm, this time with a really indirect prime. I mean, you gotta think the priming linkage goes all the way up here and then back to, it's not great at all. What kills the Doominator, the reason why this thing is gonna spell your doom in the zombie apocalypse, and it could end up in 2 ways. One, the cylinder might not lock into place, which means you might not actually be able to fire it, and it might not rotate perfectly, and the rotation mechanism on this thing is pretty violent, and it has a tendency to possibly skip cylinder shots, which means it's very, very unreliable. I don't know if that was just the initial launch and the ones that came after that were a little bit better. And besides fixing the reliability issue, the only thing that I would recommend in another iteration of the Doominator would be maybe being able to swap the way the thing spins, because if you're left-handed, this thing is awesome, because when it flips, there we go. When it flips the empty cylinder that you just spent right here. So it's easy for lefties to reuse, or just right-handed people use it left-handed. And being able to swap that with a switch or something like that so you could use it either way would be really good. And obviously maybe reinforce the materials and just make it more reliable. It's such a cool idea and it looks so good, and maybe if it had the ability to use a stalker, pull this thing out and use it as a stock, it'd be a little bit better. It's seriously a great idea that if you look online, many people have fond memories of this thing. Many people still like this blaster, but a lot of reviews at the time panned this thing for not being reliable. So maybe they fixed it with a second iteration. I don't know. This one seems to work flawlessly, and that makes this video incredibly difficult. Oh, no, it didn't, see? Oh, it's skipping so many cylinders. Yeah, this is a bad one. Oh, gross. And some people swear it works though. So what sucks is those were the only 2 pure dart blasters released in 2015 for the Zombie Strike line. I say pure dart blasters because there were Super Soakers that were awful, some of the worst Super Soakers Nerf has ever made ever, but there were also we gotta talk about Bio Squad. Really bad name. I have seriously never found one of these blasters ever. And if I did, maybe I have once and it was way too expensive. This was just a too expensive blaster when it came out though. Meet the Zombie Strike Bio Squad Eraser. Z100? This whole line's gimmick is that it fired not only darts, but also what they called zombie repellent, which I don't think there's an HVZ that ever allowed this. So this was purely just a toy gimmick for kids. And that gimmick being that zombie repellent is just literally silly string. It's a silly string blaster. It has a trigger and it has a pump. The trigger is for the silly string. The pump is for the dart. This is a $20 blaster that came with a couple of darts and of course a can of the silly string, and it is a front-loading high air pressure manual pump. It is a single shot elite dart hamp. That's like the worst thing I could ever say in a video. I want to puke just thinking about it.
I know I'm not exactly handsome, but vomiting at the sight of me is a bit rude.
For $20, you could lazily fire silly string and have a worse jolt. You shot the pump forward, and when you shock it back, it would fire the dart, making this one of the easiest blasters to modify ever because you could just brass the one barrel and use the hamp. And you know, there is something to be said about this hamp because you could make this thing hit like 90 FPS. You really could. Like, it would basically hit as fast and as hard as you could slam the pump grip back. Neat idea. Seriously. Except it was $20 for a can of silly string, a couple of darts, and only fired one dart at a time. There was a $30 blaster though that was much better. I paid $5 for this at Goodwill, and I guarantee you it was not worth it. But this is the Abolisher ZR800, and it is, it's got 8 shots on it. It's the same exact idea, with one extra caveat. This thing shot darts, it shot zombie repellent, but it also came with like a sports bottle that you could put in here and also shoot water out of it, because there's HVZs that obviously will allow you to use that. Not only could you not use the silly string, but you definitely couldn't use the water. So you could store either your extra water bottle or silly string, or just have extra one of the two right here on the back of this like hose fitting. And then of course your silly string or water bottle would go in there, and you could use this trigger to fire it. It would squeeze the bottle and make it shoot out of this nozzle up here. But of course we care more about the darts, and that's where this Hamp Roughcut comes into play. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It is a massive airflow pump that hooks up to an 8-shot smart AR system, making this a very rare example of a Hamp smart AR. Not the only one, but a very rare one at that. Load this thing up to the 8 darts, and they do fit in there really well. Not a whole lot of the dart sticks out the front. Pump that forward, pull it back, fires both darts. That is serviceable for a blaster. It's not overly large. If you were to cut the whole top off of it, it would be a relatively compact thing. The grip is not the most comfortable thing ever. This is a joke of a sling loop. I don't even know that would constitute as a sling loop, but you could technically use it to just dump I mean, this would honestly work better than the Roughcut in actual combat, to be fair. And it's not like the performance is that bad, because it's a Hamp. It's a smart air restrictor system, so you don't get the added benefit of like the super high pressure you could possibly build up with it, but it is serviceable as a dart blaster, and it was still entirely too expensive for what it was. Seriously, BioSquad had 2 releases in it, and these were not well received at all. I still think that this setup, especially if you were to just use I mean, you can't even really undermount that or anything. I think this blaster has some potential. I really do. It works okay. It's relatively compact for 8 shots, but I'm really trying to sell this to a bunch of people that don't care. And I wish I would. I need to buy some of the zombie repellent stuff before it goes out of stock. I'll never get it again. But I think they literally sell for like $15 a pack. They were like $6, $7 a refill. Now they're a little bit more expensive because they've been out of print, but the zombie repellent thing was a terrible idea, because that's litter. Like, I know that stuff's usually biodegradable, like it would melt when it got like watered and stuff, but it's such a mess. You imagine using that on an actual campus, they'd never let you play the game again. And if you use it in a park or something like that, you'd have the same problem. Really dumb idea, on top of the fact that I highly doubt anybody playing HVZ would really like you to spray that stuff on them. I mean, it's not the worst idea ever, it's just, it would take a very special group of people to allow you to do that. Really bad idea from Hasbro, and it sucks we didn't get more out of 2015 when it comes to Zombie Strike. Oh, and while you can't see it, it definitely has a wrapped grip, they just didn't bother to paint it. Stardate 2016, and what's the first thing we get out of Zombie Strike? It's a Jolt, but it's a very thematic Jolt, and one that holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts. Meet the Clampdown. This, again, is really obviously like a tool, and that's kind of the cool part with zombies. Like, it's a tool, it's a clamp. You got the little twisty bit right here. This is actually the priming rod for the blaster, but you can see like the little knobs back here. Like, this is a cool design, and it's extremely comfortable. And it's also a single-shot Jolt-like thing. I mean, you can see the plunger tube right here. It is unmistakably a Jolt with a tactical rail. So that has its own uses, and using it is as simple as can be. You front load it, pull that down, fire it. It's a Jolt. You know what to expect. But it does fit that aesthetic of Zombie Strike exceptionally well, because while it doesn't have the wrapped grip, it's a tool. And it looks cool with that grip guard right there, which, you don't do that, but you want to. But the really cool thing about this, and a lot of people thought of this, and a lot of people have built them, is that you could, because it already has the kind of the grip guard there, and the angle, you could very easily mount a foam blade on the top of this and kind of turn it into Cervantes' sword pistol thing from Soul Calibur. The Clampdown isn't anything super special, but when it comes to like actually being Zombie Strike and adapting that makeshift tool identity that I think Zombie Strike should have leaned into far more and really didn't until it was too late, the Clampdown is really high up there. And it was a really inexpensive blaster at like $7, so why the heck not? A decent addition to the line and a good way to start off after the Bio Squad. The Crosscut. I really wish I could find one of my 18 of them, but I honestly couldn't. Not that it really matters too much because there's not a whole lot to talk about with the Crosscut other than the super fun gimmick that it has. The gimmick made it a little bit too expensive for what it was though. Man, they are really trying to stretch out what $15 could get you for a Foam Dart Blaster, but the Crosscut is another Nightfinder Firestrike direct pullback blaster with a 2-shot smart AR for $15. And worse yet, this thing doesn't really fit in a holster or anything like that. It's not really practical in any means because the gimmick, the secondary trigger that's on the Crosscut, actually has a lot of resistance to it because it's meant to spin a foam blade located at the front of it like it's some kind of circular saw, which from a gameplay perspective could have a lot of application to it. And not that you could ever actually use it for like hitting a zombie because you're gonna hit somebody with plastic and get kicked out anyway. But the idea that you could use this to like saw through a lock or something, like there are things that only the Crosscut could open and use. I mean, yeah, that's a freaking awesome idea. But here we're talking about a $15 blaster that you can't really holster it, even though it does fit the really cool Zombie Strike and it's like a tool, which is like, I like how they're leaning into this tool thing. Like that's what Zombie Strike should be, right? And while it was a smart AR and you could just remove the smart AR and turn it into a 2-shot shotgun, and it was pretty good at that because of the direct prime and decent plunger tube size in it, really the modification that everybody did with this thing was they removed the foam blade. They just took it right out. Why? Because then you had a throwable foam blade. There's no plastic in the foam blade once you remove it from the Crosscut. That is something that NERF took to heart that we'll talk about really soon. Definitely not a practical blaster. Decent gimmick for $15, I guess, especially if you want like a fidget toy, but easily like skippable, which is something that kind of applies to the next blaster, although it's like the coolest thing they ever made in Zombie Strike. It's a freaking chainsaw blaster! Zombie Strike, like this was the moment that Zombie Strike was officially like the coolest thing NERF had done. This is a chainsaw, a quintessential zombie weapon that honestly would be a terrible weapon for zombies because obviously the zombie would clog up the chain and render it useless pretty much immediately. Fiction-wise, it doesn't get better than this, and the Brainsaw is awesome, even though it's not really a great blaster, especially for humans versus zombies. It seriously doesn't get cooler than this. So obviously, you've got the wrapped grip. You need to have the wrapped grip. But then you've got the screwdriver mounted to the chainsaw. You can see the chainsaw right there. The spinning blade up at the front is the actual moving portion of this blaster. You've got the chainsaw style grip that lots of people would use for various modifications in the future. You've got an angled tactical rail, because of course you'd have an angled tactical rail, and you've got a pull start right here. And it does that. That is so much fun. And unfortunately, like every single time you find one of these things at Goodwill, it's broken. Almost all the time this is ripped off, or this is broken off. But that is so cool. And then it's an actual blaster on top of that. It's basically like if Denji was a Roughcut, essentially, because there is half of a Roughcut on each side of the blaster here. But unlike basically everything else that looks like a Roughcut, this blaster doesn't fire 2 darts at once, meaning it's a little bit more practical. The pump grip is actually the screwdriver down here, which is awesome. Maybe not the most comfortable thing ever, but definitely thematically awesome. But each time you pump it, it only fires 1 dart. It does have Slingfire, which is also a good thing, but 8 shots as opposed to your normal 4, you're conserving your ammo a little bit better for the lack of a spread and maybe dart output in general, although it does have Slingfire, so it's kind of the best adaptation of that in my opinion. And this also does mean that, like, while you can kind of modify it because it is only firing 1 dart at once, it's still a smart AR, so really not a whole lot of modification. And this gimmick doesn't really, like, you can't use that against an actual zombie. It is at the front of the blaster, so you might make the argument that you could hold it like that, and if anything touched you or if you touched it. But if you were to push that into somebody, you'd probably hurt them. You'd be tempted to swing it, and this is all hard plastic. It could have been better, but at the same time, it is super cool. I really want a motorized one. I've been meaning to do that for so long. It just needs a motor. It maybe put like 2 strifes or something on the side of it. And there's so much potential with this, and honestly, the tools. Zombie Strike needs to be tools, and I'm really glad they're starting to lean into that. And we're going right from like a super awesome design to a blaster I really looked for, and I loosely call it a blaster. I have one. The last time I saw this thing, I was trying to turn it into a barrel. I don't think I ever did a video on it because the SilentStrike, I called it a blaster. It's a blowgun and it's horrible. Now keep in mind, a NERF blowgun can be a piece of PVC that you put a dart into and fire the dart. It can be that simple and honestly quite effective. Perpetual Play is the one who designed the SilentStrike, not NERF. They made all the melee weapons like the holsters and stuff like that. They were really big on the Zombie Strike stuff and they made a lot of cool things. Then there's the SilentStrike. Where do I begin with the problems with the SilentStrike? So for one, a blowgun. How do you usually use it? You have a tube, you put the thing in the tube, you blow on it.
3 darts is too much.
Fair, you know, not great for an overweight asthmatic like me, but it is a thing that people can be really good with. Blowguns at NERF are extremely effective. I mean, obviously now we live in the pandemic times, so probably not a whole lot of those going around. Hey, at least it was a thing that back in the day was acceptable. Except with the SilentStrike, you can't rear load it. You have to front load it. And then lies the second problem with the SilentStrike, is the fact that the thing has like no fit on the dart whatsoever. So it is very loosely in the tube to the point where I was like, I'm just gonna turn this into a barrel attachment because it's pretty much just normal like barrel material from NERF in like a handheld thing that has like 4 sling loops on it. And then the third problem is it's like a foot long. So it really doesn't even work because there's not enough room. And if you thought that was bad, not only is it so short, it's basically unusable as a blowgun.
Really? Blow dart in my butt cheek.
But it also has air release holes in it. And to fix that, you have to take off the shell of the SilentStrike and fill those in. And for the $10 price tag they were asking, I mean, it looks cool. It looks Zombie Strike. It is one of the worst NERF things that you could have purchased. And would you believe me if I said they did it again in the Elite line later? Awful! Dumb! But still Zombie Strike. So while the blasters have kind of forgotten that they're supposed to be like, obviously not meant specifically for humans versus zombies, the blasters are no longer practical for pretty much anything else other than being toys. Fair enough, it's for kids, I get that. They're not really moddable. They do have a cool new idea going in making these things look like they're made out of tools though, and I really liked the aesthetic and the design decisions of that. It really feels like this is where things start to go downhill. We're at 2017. And here's the Outbreaker Bow. This was like a $30 blaster. There was a lot of these, okay? Where for some reason NERF decided that the Spectre RV5 or whatever from the N-Strike line that they re-released in NERF Elite is a design they should make a lot more things out of. But it is exactly that. This is the Zombie Strike version of the Spectre. And you can see this one's had a rough life, but it's also one of the only ones I've ever seen with the bow arm still on it. This string is so worn out. So you've got a 5-shot rotating turret at the front of this thing, which is wrapped, but then the grip is also wrapped. And look at that, it's like a pair of pliers for the grip, which feels bad, but also at the same time fits the aesthetic of Zombie Strike perfectly. And then of course you've got like a pair of scissors for your prime, and it primes just like the Crossfire Bow in that regard. Again, it's supposed to be a crossbow, this time with a rotating turret. And then you got these like wing nuts on here. Like, I really love the design aesthetic. This is not a stock, this is a joke. It's another wrist brace kind of thing, but it's not a great blaster at all. No slam fire, nothing like that. And this thing is like 30 bucks. Like, the heart was there with the design. You would never really actually want to use this. It's a bad blaster for both HVZ, even as a toy. It's like, it was just kind of an expensive thing. And what really sucks about this is it was the only dart blaster released in the Zombie Strike line for 2017. I kid you not. This was a whole year of Zombie Strike. That's okay though, because the other Zombie Strike thing released in 2017 is this glorious beast. Meet the Dreadbolt. Just, again, crossbow, Zombie Strike, how about a freaking ballista? This thing's so big I can barely fit it in frame. I don't think I've ever had a chance to gush about this thing. It's both a really cool blaster and a really bad one. So this thing doesn't fire darts. It fires arrows. Now, arrows were popular with Rebel. They kind of started off as mostly arrow blasters because, you know, Hunger Games and stuff like that.
Hunger Games, yeah, 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 Hunger Games.
For some reason, the Amazon from Diablo 2 used a bow, therefore females like bows, therefore everything female. Like, this is a Rebel arrow because I can't find my Zombie Strike ones right now. Not only is this a massive cobbled together peak zombie, like look at the wrapped grip, but we've got the manufactured from random industrial parts and of course the tool aesthetic with this thing right here, which is the entire point of the blaster. It also does feature a tactical rail with like a piece of solid plastic that was a scope. I can't find it because I have the one. And this whole setup was $50 for this thing and a couple of arrows for you to have your zombie fun with, which is a lot to ask for a design like this. It has storage right up here that you can clip your arrows into, and it's an okay hold, but obviously not perfect. The arrows themselves, I do see these at war sometime, but they are like maybe not the best ammo type. Not even that you're like playing it for the thrill of hitting somebody with an arrow. The fins are kind of rubber, and the shafts are of like rubbery plastic, and then you've got the front of the head, which is squishy, and the back of the head, which is foam. It's not the most safest projectile ever, but it's okay. And the way this beast works is awesome. So the stock, again, one of the better lengths of hole you see in NERF. The wrench up here, which unfortunately is like hollowed out for $50, they couldn't make that. You rank that down. You notice how it's priming that? Awesome! Then you take your arrow and you load it in through the front. Make sure you push it all the way back there to when it clips onto the string itself. And yes, this thing is bungee powered. And then you just point it and pull the trigger and it lazily fires an arrow. I mean, you could increase the bungee strength, but you can't increase it too much or else it will slip right off the nock. And like, it's such a cool idea, but the range is pitiful. The rate of fire is awful, and the worst part about this blaster is it has like an arrow detection mechanism in here that more often than not will just simply not think that you have an arrow loaded in there. So you'll load the thing, load the arrow in, try to pull the trigger, and it will be locked. And you have to like push your fingers on the arrow more to try to, like, can you detect the thing? It's got a little window right there where you could, it still didn't work. So if you wanted to use this thing in practical foam warfare, you would immediately remove that lock. That is practically the only modification you can do. If you try to put on stronger bands, you're gonna run into the problem. I mean, these are already pretty good. You're gonna run into the problem where it won't catch or this thing won't be able to pull it back. And the worst part is this thing every time you find it in like a Goodwill or something, if you do, you can't dry fire it normally because of that dart lock, because obviously you don't want to dry fire a bow, and they also don't want you putting foreign material down here and firing that. So, but it's also like, if you're gonna go that far into making sure this thing doesn't work, then why release it, especially at $50? It is super cool, and if you have a unique use for the crossbow, you can hold 5 arrows on it at one point. I mean, it just looks awesome. It feels awesome to use until you actually try to fire it, and then you have to arc it so freaking bad in order to actually get the arrow to go anywhere. Cool idea, completely butchered. I really wish it was better than it was, because this is such a fun blaster in concept. And again, it's another ammo type added into Zombie Strike. So if there were zombies that could only be taken down with by arrows, or you could just reliably hit the zombie and pick the arrow back up, I mean, it's far easier to do that than it is with a dart, I could see some potential. The issue is that there's a better, more acceptable crossbow in the line coming, and while this one is super cool and unique, it was also $50 and freaking massive. It's one of the biggest blasters NERF ever made, especially with those huge bow arms on it. And that's all we got for 2017, believe it or not, with the exception of Zombie Strike Revenge, which shot a infecticide gel, which, like, it was just a super soaker you added powdered into that made it more like the Oozinator stuff, which, man, that's definitely a blaster I should take a look at in the very near future. But nobody wants that. Nobody wants zombie super soakers. I don't even think people really want super soakers anymore, let alone sticky, slimy stuff coming out of your super soaker. That sounds really bad out of context. That was Zombie Strike Revenge. The revenge being now you can turn the humans into zombies. Oh! But that's okay, 2018 is here. Things seem to be slowing down a bit, but it's not like Zombie Strike is done yet. This is a blaster you love to hate. It's the freaking Revreaper, a very rare type of blaster that Hasbro hadn't done for a very long time and really haven't done since then. I guess technically Buzzbee made one like this. It is a manual flywheeler. Again, aesthetically cobbled together with a bunch of random, like, there's so much greebling on here. All these blasters needed more paint detail, that's for sure. Then you've got the chain for the grip guard. You've got the wrapped grip, can't forget that. You've even got a wrapped foregrip, because you gotta have that. And it's magazine fed from the top with a magazine release right there and a jam clearing door right there. This red piece of plastic right here shows you the internals, which is of course a manual flywheeler. There is no trigger. That's what everybody hates about the Revreaper. This blaster got a bad reputation for no reason though, because it is honestly pretty solidly built. I've thrifted a bunch of these. Infamously, I made a triple Revreaper, which worked really good, and they all function perfectly. With the exception that you kind of have to pump it hard in order to fire a dart with any kind of velocity out of it. It does have, you can hear the clutch, that sound, so you can kind of short stroke it, rev it up like Sonic the Hedgehog, and then pull it all the way back to fire a dart, but it only ever pushes a dart out when the foregrip is in the rearward position. So honestly, this thing's fine. I think even as an HVZ blaster, this is perfectly serviceable. I've never had an issue with the Revreaper at all. If you want to fire it at a target, you just do that. And you get that glorious sound distortion that comes out of this thing. It works really good. It's really reliable. It's magazine fed, and obviously they're pointed downwards, so you never have to worry about like the magazine not feeding proper. It's such a good blaster. The performance is admirable. Heck, it's better than a Strife most of the time. You can't really get a whole lot of modification potential out of it. What you can do is increase the draw that you get when you prime it, because there's an artificial stop in here that there is gearing ratio to go past. So you can elongate the prime, and that will give you a better prime, first of all, that builds up more speed, but also feels a lot better to use. And again, no batteries to worry about going dead on you. Like, it's practically perfect. People just don't like the lack of a trigger. But keeping this thin profile blaster that doesn't require batteries or anything hooked onto your side somewhere and using it like a drawn secondary, like firing off the hip, It's super good for that. This is one of the more underrated Nerf blasters I've covered on the channel. I don't even think I did a video on it when it came out because, well, it was like a $25, $30 manual flywheeler. Why would you want that? And yet, even now when I have blasters that hit 400 FPS and automatic long shots and all that crazy stuff, this is still a really compelling blaster. And if you ever find one, I highly recommend you pick it up if it's at a good price because it is really fun. And if you're a running and gunning type of person, this thing is perfect for rushing. Oh, hey, look, it's another crossbow, the one that we alluded to earlier that is better than the Dreadbolt in every way. Meet the Wrathbolt. We got like a handsaw on here, which is super cool. Again, I love the tools being used. It's even got like pliers and stuff for the bow. Like, that's such a cool ass, even though it's not painted in, which is, again, the entire sin of Zombie Strike is that they have all these cool details and no paint on them. Wrapped grip, important. Really small grip though, not super comfortable even for me. But it is a crossbow and it's one of the more efficient ones you could get. All you do is you grab the string, you pull it back, and this one won't work because I forgot I tried to modify it at one point and it didn't take it. That's right, I can't even show this one firing. Thanks for that one, previous Wacom. Because again, to modify these things, all you have to do is like unscrew these two caps and you can take out the string and stretch it and try to get more power out of it. And it's like, this one is just slightly too short for it to catch. But a relatively easy mod if you don't overcut the string like I did. You then do the same thing where you just load an arrow in there. It's got a dart detection thing that of course you're gonna immediately get rid of. And then it fires. And it honestly fires better than the Dreadbolt does, and if you needed to use arrows for some reason, the Wrathbolt has got you covered. It's kind of the sister blaster to the Courage crossbow from the Rebel line. That's a similar concept where it's like a small pistol crossbow, and it does hold extra arrows on it, like, so you can kind of clip those on and have this on your... These things, again, aren't super secured. It's a little bit better than it was on like the Dreadbolt. It's such a good idea, but who needs to use arrows? Like, unless you have an actual use for arrows, you have to use them. You really don't need them. At least with this one, it's got a sling loop. You can have it somewhere on your body. You can take it out, load it with an arrow, fire it. It'll get you there if you need to have it. But really, I don't think a whole lot of people needed to use arrows. And here's a blaster I've never actually talked about on this channel before, and I never even owned a complete one until very recently when this was handed off to me at one of Jared's Epic Blaster Battles by Skittles with a Z. Thank you very much, Skittles, because I've never found one of these with the actual chain. But meet the 2018 Zombie Strike Ripchain. A really good idea that unfortunately fell flat on its face. Let's start with the negatives. It's a $40 blaster. I mean, that's a lot to ask for, but you do get the chain, which, I mean, looks like a Vulcan, and obviously if it's like a motorized internals and stuff like that, that's not a bad price tag, except for it's a freaking pump action Springer. For $40, that includes just the one chain, and it's one of those things where it's like, I wonder why they even make the chain removable, because it's just gonna get lost, and they never sold extras, and it didn't come with any extras, which would be a really cool thing to have with this blaster. Aesthetically, you've got like a freaking knife, like a box cutter right there, and then like a saw blade, and all this kind of cool greebling on it that, again, leaning into makeshift tools into weapons that Zombie Strike is doing now. I just wish they did it with better blasters. But hey, at least there's an N-Strike tactical rail at the top of it. Heck, on paper, it's not even like the blaster performs all that poorly. I mean, it is, you know, just standard N-Strike whatever. You load the 25 round chain, you put it on the blaster, you pump it back, fires a dart, hold down the trigger. It's got slam fire. I mean, all those things are good, and hey, it's got the wrapped grip. But it is a massive blaster for some reason, and the biggest issue is, like, yeah, this thing tends to be one of the worst feeding things ever. It tends to skip all the freaking time, jams up, just like it's not even indexing. Ugh, so bad for what this blaster could have been good for. And let's talk about the things this blaster could have been good for, because 25 rounds in a chain, that is relatively compact. You could fit this in a lot of different places on your gear if they sold extra ones of them. I don't know why it's linked together, because honestly, the idea of having like a maybe better version of the Dart Zone power belt would be a good thing. You can have the chain that you feed in through here, and you can have 1,000 rounds of chain on one side and just fire forever manually with like both the single shot, which is good to have, but then also slam fire if you want to pick up that rate of fire. This could have been an amazing HVZ blaster, especially if you had enough chain to support it. If it had like delinking chains every like 10-15 rounds where it would break the chain apart, fall out on the other side. That way you could have infinite chain on one side and still be able to move around and not have infinite chain on the other side. With the slam fire too, that means that like you can do the single shot, but when things get hectic, you can dump with it, or at least, you know, have a modest rate of fire, because if you try to fire this thing too fast, it's just not gonna work. It has so much potential, and yet it's $40 for a thing that barely worked to begin with. This is horrible, Hasbro. And they never sold the chain separately, and they didn't, at least not yet, ever revisit this entire idea. So you get a new chain finally from NERF that barely works, doesn't work with anything else, and is a huge, massive letdown. The Ripchain is, on paper, one of the better ideas for a humans versus zombies blaster, and they completely scuffed it every single way they could have. That is heartbreaking, and I really wish the Ripchain would have been done better. And that's how a V2 could go. Delinking chains, more reliability, structurally better, like, mechanisms. Just make it work the way it's supposed to, and it would be great! Look, I'm really sorry about this one, because I've never done a video on it. I've never even really talked about it. I have one, and yet I can't find it for the purpose of this video. Haha! Well, ignore that, idiot, because I happen to magically find most of my Scravenger. Hooray. That means the entire scripted part of this is completely worthless. Now, we talked about the Slingfire, and the Scravenger is a version 2 of that. This thing is one of the better deals that Hasbro ever did in NERF, because you got the blaster, you got another blaster, you got a stock, you got a top scope that also had a mag holder on it, you got 2 mags, you got this dinky little like green flashlight thing that's completely worthless, and a muzzle attachment for only $40, which is a lot. But the most important thing here is we talk about the actual blaster, because this does have a function the Slingfire does not have that does elevate it into, well, a lot of people have really wanted me to review this blaster in the past, and I never did for some inexplicable reason. So at first, it's a Slingfire. Magazine fed, lever action. It's got a ridiculously long reach, but it also feels a lot smoother than the Slingfire does, which is really nice. You've got a tactical rail up here at the front, a tactical rail up here on the top, a carry handle that kind of works. Going backwards towards the grip, instead of having that nice wooden stock, we have an N-Strike stock attachment point. This was actually a whole new line from Zombie Strike called Zombie Strike Survival System. And I guess survival just means attachments and more things for Hasbro to sell you. The coolest part about this, though, is they actually sold attachments separately that all fit the theme of Zombie Strike. They were monstrously expensive for what they gave you, but they did at least sell a couple of attachments. So there's 2 things that make this blaster worth anything, one of which is this little switch right here. I've only seen this feature on one other blaster ever, and it wasn't even a NERF blaster, it was like a knockoff Chinese thing. But this switch, when you push that forward, now every single time you prime it all the way back, it fires the blaster. The trigger doesn't really do anything anymore. It is just slam fire. And it has the same clutch system the Slingfire has, so you won't hopefully ever break it. That is a really neat feature. Less useful if you're actually using it like a Slingfire, although I'm not saying you can't. You can sling it. So the Slamfire thing can be disabled, and you could use it like a normal blaster. It is a select fireable Slamfire blaster. As far as I know, this is the only time NERF has ever done this, and they haven't done it since. But more importantly was the stock. And now we'll go back to past Wacom to tell you about that one. What we really care about is the stock, because the Scravenger has a stock attachment point at the bottom of the grip. And on that stock stored another blaster, the Scravenger Stock Blaster. And it's a Jolt with a smart AR system. The reason why this is so good is one, that stock, well, it's not the longest thing ever, holds the blaster perfectly. The other reason is that this is literally just a Jolt with no frills and just an extra barrel on top of the original, and the same orientation, the same perfect, it's perfect. This, if you've ever wanted to know what the best possible tertiary sidearm, whatever you want to call it, thing is, Jolt-wise, the Scravenger Stock Blaster is the best. It is a Jolt with just an extra barrel on top, and it doesn't take away from anything the Jolt does, only adds to it. It's comfortable, extremely compact for what it is. It's like the smallest thing that you can get 2 shots out of before you have to reload out of NERF. It's really, really good. And it is by far my favorite part of the entire block. I have a couple of them now, and I will gladly buy more of them because I love them so much. Every time I find them, it is like Christmas because I love the Scravenger Stock Blaster so freaking much. The rest of the blaster is okay, but a lot of you have a fond memory of it. My biggest problem with the Scravenger is it's ugly, and it's honestly not that comfortable. For the $40 price tag, you also got a lot. You got 2 magazines, you got a Slingfire that has Slamfire now, you got the stock blaster, you even got a flashlight. That was a lot to offer for a $40 price tag from NERF. So many attachments on an already really cool system. Could you mod it? Kinda? Sorta? Maybe? Man, the Scravenger is a really cool blaster. I really wish I could have demonstrated it on camera, but I seriously cannot find mine, and now they're like 80 bucks. But this idea of like having a modular Zombie Strike blaster, which wasn't really done before, was the birth of what they called the survival system, and there were 2 other things released with the Scravenger in terms of separate attachments that you could buy for Zombie Strike, and we'll cover them really quickly because one of them is literally a front rail attachment piece that holds 2 crosscut blades. So people were taking the crosscut blades out of the crosscut and using them to throw them, and NERF a few years later made that an attachment that you could spend $15 on for 2 of them. A bit expensive, but still cool that they were obviously paying attention to what the hobby was doing. And then the other thing was the chop stock, which is a $15 stock that looks like an axe that I guess technically you could use as a melee because it is a foam axe stock. It's awesome, but at the same point, a little overpriced for $15. And that's it. 3 new blasters for 2018. It's really getting thin pickings now, and with 2019, there really was only 1 mainline Zombie Strike release, and more in sub-series, but we're starting to hit towards the eventual breaking point that was the end of NERF Zombie Strike. Zombie Strike had a lot of pistols, but honestly, when it comes to like a smart AR sidearm from NERF, I think the Quad Rod was about as good as it ever got. This is a really good sidearm for a stock NERF blaster, and it actually can be modified, and it's kind of a monster when it is. The Quad Rod is a simple pistol. Notice the grip, we still have it, it's good. It's losing a lot of its like tool, but it's also gaining a lot of like scrap metal and stuff used to construct it, and it still has like some weird greave. It's okay. It's got like bolts for barrel. It's okay. But this is a 4-shot smart AR blaster that you can feed effortlessly through the front. And if only the barrels were slightly longer to cover the tips of those darts, it would be perfect. And then you just direct pull back, fires a dart, fires a dart. What you can't maybe tell is that it fires those darts relatively violently. This little guy hits a bit harder than your standard sidearm in NERF, at least stock-wise. Now we're talking 2019 at this point, so it's not exactly like you couldn't get way better things. For $10, $12 that the Quad Rod cost, like, it's so compact, so svelte. You've got the tactical rail on top, very simple operation. It's really good, and what's wild about this blaster is if you single it, it's got a really nice long thin plunger tube in it that takes a spring upgrade exceptionally well, and singled quad rods can hit relatively hard for what they are. This is a design that Hasbro would reshell again like Alpha Strike and even after that, but the initial release with the quad rod, but it's just so thin and perfect, and if it had like a holster and stuff with it, this thing would completely erase the Sidestrike from your memory. This is an awesome blaster. If you could fit it in your pocket, run it during an HVZ, it is more than reliable. This was a good one. It's a shame that they bring out so many pistols and then completely dump out all of them with the quad rot, but this is a good one. And I know I've said this a few times, and I'm gonna say it again, because we're back with survival system Zombie Strike, with thematically and maybe execution-wise, the perfect NERF Zombie Strike blaster with the nail biter. And obviously this is taking that tool repurposed as a zombie weapon to the next level, because it's a nail gun. The part with the nail biter that makes it absolutely unique and fun to use is that it's another double action design. Now, we've seen this before with things like the Snapfire 8, which break, the Void Caster, which only holds 4 darts and is like the same exact size of this thing and relatively ugly. But the nail biter was an 8-shot clip, not the most ever done ever. Single-handed operation with an 8-shot clip. And it's very easy to use, and I like it a lot. But more importantly, it fits the aesthetic of Zombie Strike. Now, obviously, the double action design of like the massive trigger being the entire priming mechanism for the blaster means that it's not the most performing thing ever, right? It's perfectly usable, and it is a survival system, so you've got a N-Strike barrel lug, you've got tactical rail on the bottom, and you've got a stock attachment point for all sorts of accessories, including the Zoom and Doom kit, which was designed specifically for this blaster and was not only sold separately, but was sold in a pack with the nail biter. The idea of taking a nail gun and being converted into an undead undoer is just thematically awesome. You could dual wield this thing. It was relatively stable too. Like, I know I was flipping the thing out like to reload it and stuff like that, but really it's you have to shake it pretty violently for it to reset. And of course, you can always add some E-tape to it somewhere to increase that friction. With some minor modifications, you can completely remove the clip. And not only could you put in other clips, but then you could also 3D print clips and you could brass clips. And this thing will take a pretty chonky spring upgrade, which also means that it increases the force that required to, you know, squeeze the grip trigger, which also means it's gonna lower your rate of fire. But all these things together made it a really compelling blaster. Just say hit 100 FPS or something, maybe on a good day with brass and perfect seal and everything like that. Just being a 60 to 80 FPS one-handed 8-shot thing that you could swap out the clips on relatively easily, and it just looks amazing. Like, look at that, it looks so good. It's awesome, and if you really wanted to, you could like clip these to your belt. You could wear a tool belt and have the nail biter in. I love this blaster. This is so perfect for Zombie Strike. This was the glimmer of hope that Zombie Strike was still gonna be awesome. There was still so much left. Oh, thinking about it now is so depressing. It's another blaster that I had at one point, gave to a friend, and don't have another one of, because it doesn't really do a whole lot different, but it was another new sub-series in Zombie Strike, the Power Shock system. Why? Because it had LEDs. So in order to help me with this, I got my friend Bots and Blasters, better known as Bots, to film me some B-roll for this talkie segment. So make sure you check out their channel by clicking on the thing in the top right corner, or of course linked in the description below. Thanks again, Bots, for helping me, because I do not have one of these blasters around, and they had one, and even theirs was broken in a way that we'll talk about. This massive $50 blaster is a Strife. It is a semi-auto thing that just has some LEDs and sounds baked into it. Now, I will make the argument the LEDs are really cool. You've got this kind of circular pattern that lights up on the side of it. You've got the top power cordy aesthetic to it that is also lit up. And you've got the spark plugs that don't light up in Bots' example, but it is really cool that it does that. And of course, you've got a couple of sound bites to go with it. This blaster, on top of anything else, really does feel like a wonder weapon from Call of Duty Zombies. It really does seem like something you just pulled out of the chest, and it is awesome. And I mean, it's a magazine-fed Strife. Like, it's huge, but it works, and it's definitely usable for HVC, and there's nothing inherently wrong with it other than the massive size and that stupid carry handle on the top of it, which is non-removable and intrinsic to the design. I mean, it's not a deal breaker, but it is really dumb that wasn't just like an attachment that you could put on the thing. If you want to mod it, well, it's a Strife. You can do all the Strife things. It does take a different cage than a Strife, but there are aftermarket cages available, especially 3D printing wise, for the Revreaper. If you want to keep the sound and LEDs, you just put those on a separate circuit, put the actual flywheels on a LiPo circuit, and do all sorts of fun stuff with it. But for $50, I would expect a lot more. LEDs, they're not that expensive. I guess they're a little bit more expensive to wire. If you're like, oh yeah, let's add $30 to the cost of the blaster by adding a couple of LEDs and a minor soundboard to it, I mean, that is expensive. What could have been done to make this a cooler blaster? Like, if I were to do a Revoltator again, make it, like, actually do something with the Power Shock aesthetic. And, well, what if it took, like, 6 AA batteries, right? And you had the option to, like, press a button that would overclock the blaster, turn the lights on it a darker color, like red, and maybe make, like, a hissing, sparking sound, and increase the flywheel voltage a little bit more, right? Like, yeah, it will hit a little bit harder, 80, 90, 100 FPS maybe. There are tons of blasters from other companies that hit that mark already before this blaster came out. There's no reason why they couldn't. And that would be a really nice, fun gimmick. Like, maybe if it even has like a circuit on board that automatically powers off and overheats it to some degree, so you can't keep using it. You could build that into a game aesthetic. Like, this was so cool of an idea that they, of course, never even did, or maybe they did and then had to strip it out because somebody at Hasbro was like, no, we need to make money. And I don't think you've realized this yet, but that's kind of what happened with Zombie Strike is, well, this is the end of 2019, and we're going into 2020, and we've got the money bugs messing everything up. Now we've got the Alternator, and not the one from Titanfall. The NERF Zombie Strike Alternator is a really cool gimmick for a pistol blaster. It's got a rotating barrel system that has 1, then 2, then 3 shots in a pistol. But it's not smart AR. It's actually firing every dart from every barrel as you swap between them, and it's relatively easy to just grab the barrel and click it into place. It's still a direct pullback blaster, so there's nothing surprising there, although you can modify those relatively easily, and the idea of it being a shotgun pistol is really cool. The design here for Zombie Strike fits perfectly, and the gimmick is really fun. Is it fun for like a $15, $20 blaster? Well, that's up to you. Really, this is a surprisingly effective option in Zombie Strike that really the only flaw is the fact that it's unholsterable. Like, you could clip it somewhere on your body or have it on a sling, but you never holster this thing, which makes it less of a sidearm and more of a secondary or even a primary. It's a SilentStrike Springer pistol that can do all sorts of cool things modification-wise. You can obviously increase the power, but what if you brassed the first barrel to be a longer, high-performance sniper barrel that you could then easily swap to the shotgun barrels for to clear out more long-range targets that you might not be able to hit as easily, or just having that panic shot on like, oh no, I'm out of ammo, I'm being rushed or something, you'd easily flip to one of the 2 or 3 shot barrels. Like, it's got a lot of mod potential. It really does. It's a cool blaster. It's just maybe a little too little, like, I don't know, like, it's really cool, but obviously, you know, Zombie Strike ended, right? That's the thing that hurts the most, is like, you know where this goes. And this was one of the final blasters we got in the line, and that's it. The Alternator was like the final death knell in Zombie Strike, before Zombie Strike became a zombie. Frickin' script fell on the floor, ruined everything. I know I was preaching about how cool the like tool aesthetic for Zombie Strike was. This was it. This was the thing that broke everything. The $30 ghoul grinder. It's not the worst idea, it just was a really bad one. So for $30, you've got this thing that is surprisingly high quality plastic for what it is, but it has a screw-on grip that went on only the left-hand side, even though the person on the box is holding one with the grip on the right-hand side, and they could have very easily have made it be ambi if they wanted to, and they didn't. But it's, this up here is actually what holds your darts and fires them. It doesn't have slam fire or anything like that. It has a rail right there that is blocked by the grinder aspect, so good luck using it for anything. And of course, this massive blaster, although relatively thin, at least at points, is only 10 shots. Obviously, this thing is supposed to be a angle grinder, and it's cool to have like the impact wrench grip on it, so you can really get that tool feel. It fires okay, but this is a giant 10-shot smart AR system that is awful. It does have an N-Strike tactical muzzle, and it also has this, what jokingly is a stock. It's so freaking short, it's not even funny. And the cool bits where there's like this barbed wire stuff is monochrome. And it's like hollow on the other side. Like, this thing was made as cheap as possible. But I think the thing that messes me up the most about this blaster, the thing that really grinds my ghoul grinder, is that it holds 10 shots. These things up here are meant to hold spare darts. And there's only 5 of them. There's no reason, there's even space where they could have just put them 2 by 2 for it to hold another 10 shots. They didn't! They didn't even freaking try with the ghoul grinder. $30! Mediocre blaster, 10 shots, and they couldn't even get the little details right with this thing. This is what Zombie Strike pretty much ended on. This was basically the last release in the entirety of Zombie Strike, and it is a freaking disaster of a design that on paper looks cool, but it should have never been made. It is impractical for pretty much everybody, and it isn't even that fun to use. Wrapped grip, they didn't even paint it. They were cutting so many corners with the ghoul grinder, because this was right when Hasbro was like, hey, let's just make money. Let's like kill all of our favorite brands, and it just got worse from here with we got Elite 2.0 and all that other garbage, where they thought marketing would pick up for the fact that they were putting out a poor product. It's not that the ghoul grinder is offensively bad, it's just a shadow of what it could have been with such minor attentions to detail. But that wasn't the last blaster. Next year, we got one very limited release through exclusively, I believe it was Major? I don't even have one of those around me. This one was actually sent to me by Buff Daddy Nerf, because otherwise I wouldn't have one. I lost the script again! It's the Contractor in the Power Shock subseries. This was $30 as well, and it is a pump action 8-shot rotating revolver cylinder. And what you just witnessed is all it does. If you don't prime it, the little 4 LEDs at the top blink at you. When you prime it, it like powers up the little coil, and then when you pull the trigger, they go the other way and it makes that shot sound. It does have slam fire. It's supposed to look like a Sawzall, I think, with like a clamp or something on the bottom of it, which the NERF logo is upside down on it, which is really weird. It's a cool idea, right? Even the NERF logo lights up. This is like an ergonomic mess. It feels awful. Should have been a stock attachment point. There wasn't. There's no barrel attachment point. There's a single tactical rail up there. And this foregrip, it works, but it's not. Look, I'm just gonna be real with you. The reason why I hate this thing is this is the last thing we got in Zombie Strike, and it's completely ineffective. It's an 8-shot revolver for $30. It is so I understand that LEDs, like wiring them up is the expensive part, but you could have done more with it, Hasbro. You could have tried a little bit. I even forgot about the glowing red one right there, which you've been looking at. Like, the effect is really cool. Why couldn't this be in something that was mag-fed? Like, just make it a better thing, put a stock attachment point on it. This is the last blaster. And it was a very limited one that few people probably picked up, especially if you were on the West Coast. You've probably never had one of these things. And I'm lucky to have the one I do. And it sucks that this was it. This was the last blaster released in NERF Zombie Strike. It died with the Contractor in 2021. And while I don't have the answers for what happened to Zombie Strike, it could have really just been the pandemic really screwed over Hasbro and production on this stuff. What we can say is that Zombie Strike started off so amazingly strong and had sprinkled throughout it a lot of really good releases and a lot of really bad ones. The series birthed so many great blasters in the line, but it obviously started off super strong and ended on an absolute whimper. And Zombie Strike deserved so much more. Hasbro kind of started to figure out what they wanted to do with Zombie Strike, doing the tool thing, and then just made a bunch of really bad blasters with the exception of like the nail biter. And from here, NERF would just get progressively worse. And you can see that with Zombie Strike. You could see the point in about 2018, 2019, where things just started to go way downhill, and it was really frustrating to watch one of the best sub-series in NERF go away. Zombie Strike ended, and with it, a whole legacy of great blasters that even still today, Hasbro could go back and revisit. And maybe they plan to, because here's the NERF Zombie line. I'm not going to talk about the blaster specifically. You'll have to tune into another video for that one. Maybe we will see that double Sledgefire. We probably won't, but if Hasbro really wants to win back some love, they really should start investing in taking risks and making their own intellectual properties good again, instead of just completely rehashing their designs into Fortnite, Minecraft, and Roblox, where it's the same blaster with a Fortnite, Roblox, or Minecraft skin on it that looks terrible most of the time, in my opinion. Where they did that for so long, their original designs have taken such a hit that NERF is probably more known, at least to recent kids, this current generation, for Fortnite than it is anything else. They probably don't even know that NERF makes their own stuff. Personally, I like it when NERF does their own thing. I think their designs, especially in the past, have been amazing. And it's really sad to see the state of the company right now, but from what we've seen coming in 2024, at least alluding to, they might be on their redemption arc right now. It's too soon to say, especially when I'm filming this video, so let past Walcom know if NERF actually got good again. NERF put a lot of effort into Zombie Strike, and it showed. It even had its like own little cartoon thing on YouTube and stuff. Like, this could have been a major hit. Even now, it's not like people are tired of zombies yet. The day before was like the most wish-listed game on Steam ever, under the purpose of it's just a zombie game, and it was a complete rip-off asset flip. Like, that's pertinent information at the time of recording this video, and yet Zombie Strike could be more, and hopefully we'll see more. Just not that. Definitely not that. From the Hammershot to the Contractor. It's a shame to see what happened to NERF Zombie Strike. And, well, let me know what your favorite blaster from Zombie Strike is down in the comments below, because honestly, I really want to see if you love this series as much as I do. I'm a big fan of a lot of the stuff NERF did from the mid-2000s up till, mid-2010s. Zombie Strike was probably one of the best of that. Even the stuff like the Fusefire that doesn't fit in the Zombie Strike line, I still love it so much. And as for these things, well, that's coming up next. The other box is the drill thing. It just, for some reason, didn't come in the packaging. Because Amazon. Is that really what I'm going to end this on? No. I'm thankful if you got to the end of this video, if you watched it. This was a ton of work, and honestly, I could put more work into it, and I wanted to. But I have to thank the sponsor for this video, which was Royal Match. Please download that game. Just give it a try. I really appreciate them sponsoring this video to give me the chance to take the risk to do a video like this. And of course, for you to watch all the way to the end here and support me in quite possibly the biggest way, which is actually watching my content. This is the first time I ever scripted out a video, and even then, I don't really think I really stuck to the script all that much. I need to get a prompter, but this was 85 pages of typed out stuff. And it's the first time I've done it, and I think that might be the way I go forward. Makes it easier for me to get my thoughts on product like this, where I have so little to talk about on camera, into words that I can then use as a guideline for the video. Maybe that's the risk I need to take evolving my content further down the road. But of course, I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank Bots for giving me a handoff with the Revoltonator footage, because I was stuck otherwise, and I'm really sorry for the blasters I didn't have on hand that I could have had in this video. You have no idea how long it took me to find all the ones that I did find, because it took me a very, very long time. Longer than many other videos from start to finish, just digging through boxes trying to find Zombie Strike blasters. And of course, we have to do this again. And this video is popular. I'll do another one way sooner than you think, and I'm really feeling NERF Rebel. Because there's a lot to love in NERF Rebel, and there's a lot to hate.